Okay, so I want to play a little game with you here, right? This is called Name the President that said the quote. The purpose of cutting taxes is to increase investment and employment.
I know that one. Everyone's going to say it's Reagan, but no, it's JFK.
JFK, Democrat hero JFK. Here's another one. Government does not tax to get the money it needs. Government always finds a need for the money it gets.
I tell you, our libertarian governor was so kind to me. He sent me a check for $750. I mean, I've known him for a while, and I like him, but just out of the kindness of his heart, he sent me $750. Kind of makes me want to vote for him, doesn't it? Does it make you want to do that? Ben Murray's with us, a fiscal analyst at the Independence Institute, runs it all. So I want to talk about these cash back, Colorado cash back. I find the title so very insulting that here's your cash back. I read the letter. It was missing a few things. You got the letter. What did it say?
I don't remember word for word, but I'll tell you this. My wife is not a fiscal analyst. She would never want to do what I do. And I handed her the letter.
Nobody wants to do what you do. That's why the left always wins.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. No, I handed her the letter when it came in the mail, knowing what it was. And I said, Rachel, what is this? And she read it and she goes, oh, it looks like Polis is sending us money. This is, wow, what in the world? And I said, would you be surprised if I told you those are our TABOR refunds? She did a double take at the letter and she said, what? No, it doesn't say anything about TABOR in here.
Right, and so we have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and it's 30 years this year, anniversary of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which says a couple of things. One, we get to vote on taxes and debt, even though they found ways around that. And two, governments, all governments in Colorado, can only take so much money in based on population growth and inflation growth, and after that, they've either got to give it back to us or ask us if they can keep it. Now, originally it said you can keep it for 4 years, and the Supreme Court said, no, if you ask them, 4 years could be interpreted as forever, because they sound alike. So I remember getting refunds in the past. Usually they were on our tax forms, which was, here's this, here's the tax you owe, minus your refund. So on tax day, you get your refund. It looked really simple. Why is it not that way this time?
Well, a cynic might say that it was an election year ploy to buy votes, or to make it appear as though these Democrats are giving us money that we wouldn't have gotten anyways. Of course, you and I know that we would have gotten this money anyways when we went to file our taxes because they're TABOR refunds. But what these politicians did is they said, you know, we hate TABOR. We don't like it. In fact, in 2019, I'm sure a lot of us remember, they tried to get rid of our TABOR refunds forever. Jared Polis was up on the podium on the Capitol steps advocating for abolishing TABOR refunds forever. Voters said no to that.
That was referendum CC. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing that even some of the folks who voted in the legislature to create this referendum are now taking credit on this election year for your Colorado cash back. I think the term is chutzpah. I mean, it really takes a lot of gall to take credit for something you tried to destroy and make not happen.
Well, and you know, to their credit, the mainstream media in Colorado, mainstream Colorado press, and even the left-leaning press has called Jared Polis out on this, which just shows you how bad it is.
All right, so is it a bad thing that he front-loaded this TABOR refund, our Taxpayer Bill of Rights? We've overpaid our taxes. We've paid more than what is allowed by the formula of population growth and inflation. I kind of like the idea of getting my money now rather than 8 months from now. Is that a bad thing?
No, not at all. I mean, especially with inflation where it is, it just came out at 8.5%, so it's actually gone down slightly since last month. But inflation's still at record highs. It's a good thing to get that money a little bit earlier while it's worth more.
Then what's the problem, you cynic?
Well, I don't have a problem with getting the money earlier. I have a problem with the political ploy and the deception.
I have a problem with the dishonesty of it, which is to say that we're giving money back without saying why we're giving money back, as if the legislature, out of the kindness of their hearts, decided to give us some of our own money back. they have no choice. They have to give it back. Now, they can decide any sort of way to do it. But wait a second. How much more do you think they would have given us if over the last few years they didn't pull these tax increases away called fees? And so when they call something a fee, what they do is they take it out of the line item of the budget, the general fund, they put it in a different bucket. And that way there's more room for this to grow before it hits the TABOR limit. And I think about all these fees, from our gas tax fees to delivery fees to Uber fees, all the other stuff that they have pulled out, how much bigger our refunds would be if they didn't pull that money out. Do you have any idea what that number is by chance?
I don't. It's extremely hard to determine for various reasons. In fact, I reached out at one point over a year ago to Ledge Council, and they effectively said, we don't exactly know, and we don't know that we could even tell you if we tried. It's complicated. But I'll tell you this.
But it's billions.
It's a lot of money in the billions. And I'll tell you this. In this particular session this year, since they knew we were getting $3.5 billion plus TABOR refunds anyways, they actually sort of did the opposite of what you just described. You didn't see a lot of raising taxes or fees as they've done in the past, because they knew they couldn't keep that money anyways, okay? They knew it would just go right back to voters if they increased taxes and fees and increased government revenues this year. So because we have these
when
massive...
they increase a fee, that actually can lower, or they can pull money out. When they increase a fee, they can keep it because they call it an enterprise.
Right, that's true. So that's one thing they do is they'll create a new tax, they'll call it a fee, and put it into an enterprise, which is outside of the TABOR limit, right? So that's absolutely true. But what you actually saw a lot of this particular year, so what you just described, we've seen a lot of for the past 3 years. This year they said, we're going to save Coloradans money. And so they actually reduced...
Coincidentally on an election year.
On an election year. Yeah. So they actually reduced fees, certain fees that are subject to the TABOR limit. But it didn't touch their budget. What it did is it just reduced the amount of TABOR refund we get, right?
So when they were so kind as to postpone their gas tax until after the election, they're just taking money out of what would have been our TABOR refunds anyway.
Exactly.
It cost them nothing to say we're going to save Coloradans money by postponing the new gas tax, which we call a fee, so you didn't have to vote on it. That's
exactly it. That's the game that was played.
Let me get a little ethereal for a second. I think there's a real danger to the republic, to democracy in Colorado, in the way that they have been destroying and getting around the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. If it's a tax, they have to ask us, but they know we'll likely say no. So over the years, they keep coming up with fee after fee after fee, and mill levy freezes, and faster fees, and hospital bed fees called the hospital provider fee, and now fee on gas and a fee on every time Amazon drops off a package to you. Every time Netflix sends you a DVD for rental, you're paying 27 cents on it, even though it goes through the U.S. mail. It has nothing to do with Colorado. So all these things pull the money out of that bucket that the general fund is. And the general fund is run by our elected officials. This other bucket called enterprises, fees, it's appointed people. And so you don't have taxation with representation. You have appointed, non-elected people running over that budget. When TABOR started 30 years ago, that bucket was about a third of the size of the general fund. Now the general fund is about a third the size of that bucket. Most government in Colorado is happening without direct representation of the people. That we're electing people to take care of the smaller amount of our budget, and governmental appointees and cronies are running all the other, quote, enterprises without any transparency and without any accountability. That is taxation without representation, and that is a threat to democracy.
Well, we talked before on your show about how Democrats in this state seem to really disdain democracy, don't they?
Well, let's be honest, it's not all Democrats. There are plenty of Republicans who put votes on to pull this money out so they don't control it, but somebody else does.
That's fair. I target Democrats in this case because they've had control, entire control of the state government for 4 years now. But you're right, you make a good point. It's not just Democrats.
All right, so we're getting this TABOR money back. it leads me to a simple question. Why are we paying extra taxes to begin with if they're just going to turn around and have to give it back to us? It seems like an exercise. I know that in order to do these checks, instead of just putting it on our tax form, it's costing millions of dollars more. And the governor, the candidate for governor, gets to send out these wonderful letters without even mentioning why he has to give you this money back. And it costs money. Why the hell are we collecting this money just for them to turn around and write a check to us back? It's overpaying, and then they get to play with it.
It feels a lot like Polis is trying to buy our votes with our TABOR refunds. It does feel a lot that way. You make a good point, and I'm going to go ahead and move forward with something the Fiscal Policy Center has been working on, something Independence Institute has been working on actually for decades before I even got here. But we're now calling the Path to Zero plan. And this is a path to zero income tax. Now, you may remember in 2020, we had Proposition 116 on the ballot that voters approved and reduced the income tax. This year, there's going to be another initiative on the ballot. It's now called Initiative 31, and it will reduce the income tax.
It'll probably be called Prop
121.
121.
Yep. But we're waiting for the naming, and that will also reduce the income tax. Now, what this means in years where we're going to get a TABOR refund is effectively that we're getting those refunds earlier, rather than that money coming out of our paycheck and sitting with the state until we file our tax returns or until Governor Polis decides to send us a check with his name on it. Instead, we just get to keep that money to begin with. The idea is, if we're going to have to get that money back, if the state's going to have to give us that money back anyways, then why not just let us keep it to begin with?
So the Independence Institute actually has a long history of this. Before independents got involved, back in the 80s, we had a multiple layered tax system. And the highest bracket was over 8%. I think it was 8%, maybe a little bit more. And it was an economist at Independence, Barry Paulson, CU professor, who said if we had a flat tax, it would be a lot easier. That means we wouldn't be spending as much on accounting. It would encourage people to do more. And he said at the time, in order for it to be revenue neutral, that tax rate should go from 8% and have one flat tax rate at 4.5%. So, in the deal struck with the legislature, did they go with 4.5%? Of course not. They went with 5%. So, in 1986 or 87, I'm trying to remember, we got our flat tax rate at a 0.5 percentage point higher than it should be. So, yet it turned into another windfall for the state government. And over time, Independence has been involved in bringing it down. Under Bill Owens, God bless him, he was able to bring it down when we had surplus funds, brought it down to 4.63.
That's right.
And then 2 years ago, it was Prop 116 that brought it down to 4.55. And this year, assuming we're successful, Prop 121 will bring it down to 4.5%. What it should have been.
4.4%.
4.4%, excuse me, 4.4%.
Right. Yep.
That's right.
Yep. But John, this is good and it's helpful, but this is part of a broader plan that Independence Institute's been a part of, like you said, for years, working on reforming the income tax, where ultimately we'd like to see the income tax go away completely. And there are 7 other states that have zero income tax at all, and there's no reason why Colorado can't join them.
All right, let's just talk about it before we get to Colorado. We have 50 states, we have 50 laboratories, they all do different things. Some of these states have zero income tax. Those seem to be the growth states right now. I'm thinking of Wyoming, which is exploding, Texas, which is exploding, Florida, which is exploding. Why is it that those states, particularly during this high inflation and recession coming, why is it that those states really are growing when New York and California, the ones with multi-leveled taxes and high taxes, aren't doing as well?
Well, for obvious reasons. People like to go where they're treated well. And being treated well in the tax world means being taxed less. So it tends to be the case that people want to go where they're taxed less. But income tax specifically matters, right? Because the way you tax affects economic behavior.
How do you mean that? Because, I get that. I've heard people say, we've got 3 legs of a stool here in Colorado. But we have a sales tax, we have income tax, we've got God knows how many different fees and specialty sin taxes and little taxes on this and little taxes on that. And in education and local property taxes, which are getting higher and higher and higher. One of the things that amazes me is people think that Colorado is a low tax state. And we forget that we have 5,000 governments in Colorado. And our local government, when you add it to the state government, puts us right in the middle of the pack on taxation. In fact, we're one of the highest tax states when it comes to local taxes. And so we're not having a great time here in Colorado. This is a high tax state. It's just in your local taxes, in your sales taxes, in your property taxes, more so than your income tax. All right, so if you're going to eliminate one tax, why make it the sales tax? Why not make it, or why make it the income tax? Why not the sales tax or one of these other silly fees? Why income tax?
So because taxes affect behavior. When you tax something, you disincentivize that thing, right? So we like to say in policy, if you want less of something, tax it. So
you want more of something, you subsidize it.
Subsidize it, right? Give out grants or something. So if you think about sales tax, right? What does sales tax really tax? It taxes consumption, right? I want to go out and buy a new flat screen television. Oh, it gets slapped with a tax. If I saved that money, it wouldn't get slapped with that tax, right? So it makes it that much more difficult, that much more costly to buy a flat screen television if you tax flat screen televisions. It discourages that behavior. Income is earned through being productive and through working. So what are you taxing? What are you discouraging if you tax income? You're discouraging work and productivity. That's the last thing you want to discourage.
There is an ethical part of this, and I think you're touching on it, which is people have a right, I believe, to make an income. And they have no choice but to make an income. When it comes to consumption, you have a lot of choices. You don't have to buy that TV, you could buy that TV. You don't have to buy these clothes, you can buy those clothes. You have more control over that. When it comes to having an income, it's what we tell kids from the day they're born. Work hard, go get an education, and make a good living. Well, why is it that on one side we say, make a good living, and the other side we say, oh man, make a good living, the more you make, the more we're going to tax you, because we really don't want you to make an income.
Well, and that's what the left wants, right? The left wants the opposite of what we're doing.
Why so?
So the left actually wants us to move to an extremely progressive graduated income tax, where you actually get increasingly punished the more productive you are and the more you work, right? So that would actually have the same effect of any income tax, only to a much larger degree.
Well, they say the more you work. Hey, a guy is spending 40 hours working at McDonald's. A guy is working 40 hours as the head of Chipotle, and he's making millions of dollars.
Guarantee you the head of Chipotle doesn't work 40 hours. Maybe he does now, but when he was running his business, he's probably working 80 to 100 hours a week. First of all, job creators are some of the hardest working people in this state.
That's an angle I want to get down, which is we want to attract risk takers to Colorado. We want to attract people who build businesses. We want to attract those folks. And where are they going? It's interesting to see that Elon Musk, like so many other Californians, are bailing to go to a zero tax state like Texas.
John, I love that you brought up that point. So I read a study recently. I wish I could tell you who it was. I could find it later. That evaluated where businesses fleeing California are going to. Right? So where are these job creators going when they're chased out of California by their high taxes and high regulations? The two of the very top two states, Tennessee and Texas, are both zero income tax states.
It's not a surprise. And so, I mean, Tennessee and Texas don't have what we have. They don't have mountains. They don't have columbines. They don't have legal pot and good craft beer. And so there's an attraction to Colorado for a lot of employers. But these businesses and the businessmen and women who create them, they want to keep as much money as they can so they can invest it back in their businesses and other enterprises. It's no wonder they're going to Texas. Do you want them to come to Colorado instead?
If you want jobs and you want economic growth, you sure do. You know, it's funny. It's funny. Think about this, right? I love your point. Colorado has so many natural pull factors. We can probably get away with having less attractive tax policy, less attractive regulatory environment, and still be competitive with other states like Texas. In order to get someone to want to move to the swamp of Houston, like it's got to be pretty darn attractive on the public policy front. They don't have mountains in their backyard, right? So imagine if Colorado competed with Texas and got rid of their income tax too, plus all the natural benefits we have. Texas wouldn't be able to touch us.
Well, and also Texas has something else. You can afford to buy a home in Texas. The cost of living is cheaper there. So not only do you get to keep more money, you get to live in a mansion compared to what you can get here in Colorado. You get to save that money to build your own private business or send your kids to school or to go on a vacation or put into your retirement, whatever it is you choose to do. So let's talk about getting from here to there. Again, it's pretty amazing that when Independence Institute started this quest, tax rate here was 8%. By the end of this year, assuming that Prop 121 passes, which I think it will, it's going to be down to 4.4%. Are we going to see something that's like a ball rolling down the hill, that maybe this will continue as it keeps going? And at what point do you say, let's just get rid of it altogether like so many other states have? What do you think's going to happen?
So what the Fiscal Policy Center has said is that it makes sense to create a mechanism to ratchet down the income tax rate automatically. So over the last few years, we've been doing it through voter approval. It's not an automatic ratchet down, but we've been ratcheting it down, which is great. But if we can create an automatic ratchet down mechanism, that would be ideal. And the way we've proposed doing that is by using the TABOR refund mechanism to do it over time. Now, here's how that would work. Right now, when there's a TABOR refund, when there's a surplus of revenue that the government has to refund to taxpayers, they do it in whatever way that the legislature dictates. The first thing you would do for this reform that we're suggesting is you would mandate that the state issue refunds through income tax rate reductions only, right? The entire refund would be issued by just lowering the income tax rate such that revenue doesn't come above the limit, right? But then the second part of it, and this is key, that new rate would become the permanent rate moving forward. And that would continue until there's no income tax at all.
All right, let me challenge you on this. Right now, there are people out there grabbing their pearls going, wait, I'm an equity person. I want fairness. How is it fair that a poor person who might not pay any income tax, that they shouldn't get some sort of refund directly to them, like in that check we just got? In other words, why the income tax?
I think that's a common argument. The reason why is because most of the general fund revenue does come from the income tax, as Legislative Counsel points out in their analysis of the measure that's going to be on the ballot. And it makes sense. It's fair that those who pay the tax should also benefit from the refund.
Also keep in mind, most sales tax is on the local side. It's less than 3% sales tax on the state side. So if sales taxes are hurting working people, again, it goes back to where taxes really hurt people, and that's on the local side, not the tax side. Why do I have a hard time seeing that a lot of these folks want this? They want some justice. I keep hearing that a flat tax really is just a rich guy's tax. Is it?
Well, it just so happens that the flat tax is the only really progressive tax that we have in Colorado.
Wait a minute. Progressive tax means that people who make more are supposed to pay more in taxes. How can a flat tax
it's a little
how can it be progressive?
It's a little counterintuitive, but our flat tax is in fact progressive because of the standard deduction. So the Colorado tax base is based essentially on the federal tax base. The federal government grants a very large standard deduction, about $12,000, I think it's $12,600 this year for individuals, double that for joint filers. So that means if you make, let's say you're an individual making $20,000 a year, you're not taxing the first.
I think it's $17,000 actually.
Is it now?
Yeah.
I think that might be for, but
all right, let's take it.
Whatever
take
it is, it's a large amount. I think it's 12.6. So you're only really taxed on, $7,400 or so. Now that's at 4.55% right now. Even though your income was $20,000, you're a low earner. You're only taxed on a little over $7,000 of that. So your effective rate on the $20,000 is, maybe 2% or something.
All right, let me kick that back to you, make sure I'm following you. So we might get a tax rate that's flat, but the first part of your income is never counted in that calculation. So for lower earners, that could be half of their income isn't taxed at all.
Right.
Whereas for a rich guy, almost all of it is taxed.
Right. If you're making $400,000 a year and the first $13,000 isn't taxed, well, your real tax rate, your effective tax rate is almost the same as the actual tax rate.
What else do we need to know about this that we don't? Why would somebody go, a flat tax? That's the way to go. What's the major attraction?
In my view, the major attraction, number one, is that Coloradans are just hurting. They're hurting under the pain of inflation. Now we're staring down the barrel of a recession potentially. It's
high employment costs for small businessmen, high home costs for anybody who wants to live with a roof over their head.
At the end of the day, cutting the income tax is going to allow more Coloradans to keep more money in their own pockets and spend in a way that's going to be directly beneficial to them, rather than sending that money up to the state for politicians and bureaucrats to spend for them. I've never heard of an economy being taxed into prosperity. Have you?
Yeah, I went to college, so I heard about it all the time. No, not in reality. Somebody's going to watch it and go, what? But how are we going to afford the core functions of government if the income tax, which we rely upon so much, is gone?
Well, let me share something with you about that. The general fund budget, despite Proposition 116 that lowered the income tax, despite the pandemic, the general operating budget, what the state calls general operating budget, grew since right before the pandemic by 25%. Do you think most people's household budgets in Colorado grew by 25% since right before the pandemic? I don't think so. I think the state can figure out where to get the money from as we ratchet it down, considering the growth that they've just experienced.
And to bring this full circle, when we were talking about our refund checks should be larger if the government didn't keep putting things like fees on, because fees take it out of this pot, which does get refunded, and puts it into this other pot, which doesn't, lowering the level of the first pot. Well, this pot now is twice the size of this pot. These are the fees. Does getting rid of an income tax, does it get rid of all those fees?
No, it doesn't. But one way to look at it is the state has played games since TABOR to shift revenues from general fund revenues to fee-based revenue. That's what you explained earlier, right? And what eliminating the income tax would do would be saying, look, enough with the games. You want to shift revenue from, mostly being from income tax and general fund revenues to being fee-based? Fine. Then we're going to take away your income tax revenue since you've grown revenue over here so much, right? But what politicians want is they want to have it both ways. They want to keep that TABOR base, right? They want to keep the income tax, but then they want all this extra revenue through fees.
Other states have done this successfully. Their economies are on fire. States that have gone the other direction are suffering. People are leaving. High tax states. Illinois is having a negative population growth. People are fleeing out of California. The most productive people are fleeing out of California. The guys who take their businesses and the hundreds and thousands of jobs with them to get to states with no income tax. If we want to protect Colorado's future, if we want Colorado to be an economic engine, we need to be competitive against these other states, which means we need to have a really attractive tax policy, and a zero income tax would do that. That's what this path to zero is all about.
Okay, so I want to play a little game with you here, right? This is called Name the President that said the quote. The purpose of cutting taxes is to increase investment and employment.
I know that one. Everyone's going to say it's Reagan, but no, it's JFK.
JFK, Democrat hero JFK. Here's another one. Government does not tax to get the money it needs. Government always finds a need for the money it gets.
That sounds like a Reagan.
That's
tax.
Reagan. That's Reagan. He's spot on.
Yeah. Appreciate it. I look forward to a Colorado with no income tax. Ben Murray, thanks.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.